I'm Elizabeth at Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another installment in my 18th century novel project for you, and we will be looking at The Italian by Anne Radcliffe from 1797. So, please do note there will be spoilers for The Italian in this video, and like this this has some twists, and I do kind of recommend going in blind to it. So if you have not read The Italian and you want to keep all the surprises intact, you should click away from this video now. How this works is that I will begin with a brief history and summary of the novel before moving into some of the major themes that I noticed and ending with my thoughts on it as a book. Let's jump in. So, Anne Radcliffe was born as Anne Ward on July 9th, 1764. She died on February 7th, 1823 at the age of 58. She married William Radcliffe in 1787. He worked for a radical newspaper called the Gazetter and New Daily Advertiser. And according to an autobiography that she started writing, is my understanding, but never finished, she started writing because he was working late and she was bored. Whether that's actually true, who knows? So she has 6 novels, 5 of which were published in her lifetime, 1 posthumously. The best known is, of course, The Mysteries of Udolpho from 1794, because Jane Austen parodies it in Northanger Abbey. But she did also write poems and 1 travelogue. Radcliffe is considered one of the founders of the Gothic genre, specifically of the subgenre of the explained supernatural. So nothing that happens in her books is actually supernatural. It seems supernatural, but then there is a rational explanation for it at the end. She referred to her books as romances. Romance meant a very different thing in the 18th century than it did now. It meant more these long, sprawling kind of adventure stories that sometimes involve these supernatural elements, not like a love story like we think of it now. So Radcliffe stopped publishing after her 5th novel at the age of 32, and then went into seclusion for 26 years, and nobody really knew what happened to her. So there were tons of rumors that she died or she went insane because of all of the horrid things she had written. Oh, that drove her insane. It's not true. She just wanted her privacy. God forbid. God forbid a woman want privacy. So that 5th novel, that was the final one she published, was The Italian. So I said it came out in 1797, and that is what it says on the title page. Technically, it came out in December of 1796, but because it was so close to the end of the year, they put 97, and we just go with that, it seems. This is actually way more common than you think it is, and it's really actually quite irritating. But it's generally considered 1797. Okay, whatever. This is frequently viewed as a response to Matthew Lewis's The Monk, which came out in 1796, also dealing with a villainous monk. And Lewis uses a lot of supernatural elements, so this is kind of seen as Radcliffe's response to that. She did not like these supernatural elements being brought into the Gothic genre. She was paid an absolutely spectacular £800 for this novel. Now, that would be more than £100,000 in today's money. She was the highest paid writer of the period. This is literally insane. So what is The Italian about? We are following kind of star-crossed lovers, Vivaldi and Elena. Vivaldi is the son of a and I don't speak Italian, so things are going to be pronounced horribly wrong, probably, of a Marchese, M-A-R-C-H E-R-E-E-S-E, I think. Is it on the back? Of course it's not on. No, it is. Marchese. So he's a nobleman. Elena is supposedly this like just completely random person, but she is beautiful and she is kind and she is virtuous. So Vivaldi's parents are not very happy about him becoming engaged to her. They don't want this marriage to happen. So his mother, the Marchesa, calls in her confessor, Father Schedoni. And is like trying to get his help with this. And Schedoni is a man with secrets. He seems like a good and virtuous priest on the outside, but in reality, he is pretty despicable and has dark secrets. And at first, him and the Marchesa just try to spirit Elena off and imprison her in a convent. That doesn't work. Vivaldi goes and rescues her. So they're like, well, now what do we do? And Schedoni's like, well, you could murder her. And the Marchesa's like, I could murder her. So they plot to do that. They manage to capture both Vivaldi and Elena right before they get married. They are literally at the altar. Elena is whisked off to this place where somebody is going to assassinate her, basically. Vivaldi ends up in the grasp of the Inquisition, who are accusing him of heresy. Schedoni ends up not being able to go through with the murder of Elena. And I don't want to say why because it is such a spoiler. And he has like a complete 180 and now is like, I want them to get married for my own personal reasons. How are we going to convince the Marchesa of this? Oh crap, Vivaldi's in the grasp of the Inquisition because I put him there. What am I going to do about that? In the meantime, there has been this mysterious monk appearing to Vivaldi at various times, warning him not to go to Elena's house. He thinks it's Schedoni. However, this monk appears to him in the prison where he's being held, telling him, like, this is what Schedoni has done, and you need to tell the Inquisition this stuff and have them call forth all these witnesses so that we can get him, basically. And Vivaldi doesn't want to do that. He's like, this is so not my business. But he ends up doing it. And it is revealed that Schedoni is actually a nobleman who had murdered his brother in order to marry his brother's wife. The brother's wife ran away because she hated him so much, along with her 2 children, one of which died. And the other of which she put into the care of her sister. So this is all revealed. It turns out Schedoni had confessed this to a priest, which they're not allowed to tell about confessions, even when it's like murder. So all of this comes out that he is a murderer and all this stuff, and he is imprisoned. Vivaldi is freed. Him and Elena are able to get married because the Marchesa has died and repented, attempting to murder a girl. And we all live happily ever after. That's a basic summary. So, what are the major themes that I noticed? First up is one that you kind of have to talk about with any piece of romantic literature, and that is nature and the sublime, because they were huge on that. And Radcliffe has a lot of very detailed descriptions of scenery and how it makes people feel, particularly Elena. So the first time she was kidnapped, she was taken through this region with mountains, and Radcliffe writes, Elena, after having been so long shut in darkness and brooding over her own alarming circumstances, found temporary, though feeble, relief in once more looking upon the face of nature, till her spirits being gradually revived and elevated by the grandeur of the images around her, she said to herself, if I am condemned to misery, surely I could endure it with more fortitude in scenes like these than amidst the tamer landscapes of nature. Here the objects seem to impart somewhat of their own force, their own sublimity to the soul. It is scarcely possible to yield to the pressure of misfortune while we walk, as with the deity, amidst his most stupendous works. And then she goes on to say, she experienced somewhat of a dreadful pleasure in looking down upon the irresistible flood, but this emotion was heightened into awe when she perceived that the road led to a slate bridge, which, thrown across the chasm at an immense height, united two opposite cliffs, between which the whole cataract of the river descended. The bridge, which was defended only by a slender railing, appeared as if it hung amidst the clouds. Elena, while she was crossing it, almost forgot her misfortunes. So Elena is frequently finding comfort in the landscape around her and its absolute beauty and its connection with God as the creator. Well, imprisoned in the convent, one of the nuns, Sister Olivia, shows her to this room where there is a absolutely magnificent view. And Radcliffe writes, she approached the windows and beheld thence a horizon and a landscape spread below, whose grandeur awakened all her heart. The consciousness of her prison was lost, while her eyes ranged over the wide and freely sublime scene without. She goes on, hither she could come, and her soul, refreshed by the views it afforded, would acquire strength to bear her with equanimity through the persecutions that might await her. Here, gazing upon the stupendous imagery around her, looking, as it were, beyond the awful veil which obscures the features of the deity and conceals him from the eyes of his creatures, dwelling with a present God in the midst of his sublime works, with a mind thus elevated, how insignificant would appear to her the transactions and sufferings of this world. So these scenes of nature elevate her to be above what is happening to her. And then when she finally arrives back in Naples, which is where they are from, Radcliffe writes, as at length she drew near Naples, her emotions became more various and powerful, and when she distinguished the top of Vesuvius peering over every intervening summit, she wept as her imagination charactered all the well-known country it overlooked. But when, having reached an eminence, that scenery was exhibited to her senses, when the Bay of Naples, stretching into the remotest distance, was spread out before her, when every mountain of that magnificent horizon which enclosed her native landscape, that country which she believed Vivaldi to inhabit, stood unfolded, how affecting, how overwhelming were her sensations. Every object seemed to speak of her home, of Vivaldi, and of happiness that was past, and so exquisitively did regret mingle with hope, and the tender grief of remembrance with the interest of expectation, that it were difficult to say which prevailed. And this is contrasted with Schedoni's reaction. Radcliffe writes, her expressive countenance disclosed to the confessor the course of her thoughts and of her feelings, feelings which, while he contemned, he believed he perfectly comprehended, but of which, having never in any degree experienced them, he really understood nothing. The callous Schedoni, by a mistake not uncommon, especially to a mind of his character, substituted words for truths, not only confounding the limits of neighboring qualities, but mistaking their very principles. Incapable of perceiving their nice distinctions, he called the persons who saw them merely fanciful, thus making his very incapacity an argument for his superior wisdom. And while he confounded delicacy of feeling with fatuity of mind, taste with caprice, and imagination with error, he yielded when he most congratulated himself on sagacity, to illusions not less egregious because they were less brilliant than those which are incident to sentiment and feeling. So very tellingly, the villain of the story is not able to find this beauty and awe in nature. We also have this constant imagery of a veil. Like, everybody is always wearing a veil, or their pasts are veiled. And this is going with the theme of concealment. So when we first meet Elena, like the very first chapter, it was in the church of San Lorenzo at Naples in the year 1758 that Vincenzio di Vivaldi saw Elena Rosalba. The sweetness and fine expression of her voice attracted his attention to her figure, which had a distinguished air of delicacy and grace, but her face was concealed in her veil. He then eventually catches a glimpse of her when her veil like kind of blows up, I believe, in the wind. So this is just one of many characters who are said to be wearing a veil or to be veiled in some way. It refers both to the physical veil that she is wearing, but it also refers to her past being a mystery. And we have lots of characters like that, where their pasts are concealed, or their true characters are concealed. And Radcliffe is constantly saying that they are veiled. So we similarly have something when Schedoni is first introduced. There lived in the Dominican convent of Spirito Santo at Naples a man called Father Schedoni, an Italian, as his name imported, but whose family was unknown, and from certain circumstances it appeared that he wished to throw an impenetrable veil over his origin. So this, like, it's concealed. His origin is concealed, but he also has his face veiled sometimes. His cowl, too, as it threw a shade over the livid paleness of his face, increased its severe character and gave an effect to his large melancholy eye, which approached to horror. So his face is also kind of obscured. Another character who has a mysterious past is Sister Olivia, who Elena meets when she is in the convent, imprisoned. And when Elena first sees her, we are told her face was concealed by a black veil, whose transparency, however, permitted the fairness of her complexion to appear. And her mysterious origin also becomes important to the plot, but also her veil is able to protect Elena and allow her to escape the convent. Olivia says to Elena, "My veil, though thin, has hitherto protected you, and we must hope it may still assist your purpose." And it does. It does, however, end up getting her in trouble because she is wearing a nun's veil when she goes to get married to Vivaldi, and she is mistaken for a nun who has broken her vows. When Vivaldi is arrested by the Inquisition, some people that Schedoni hired take Elena off under this idea that she's this escaped nun. So the veil is like, it's a double-edged sword. It can conceal you and keep you safe, or it can put you in danger, or it can conceal something horrible. In the end, like, all of these concealments, the veils are pulled back. We know everybody's true history. And what I really like is that at the end, when Elena and Vivaldi are getting married, Radcliffe brings back the veil imagery. And we are told that her veil is partly undrawn to allow Paolo, who is Vivaldi's servant, to see the tender complacency that she had on her face. So I liked that she brings this veil imagery like full circle. Kind of going along with this veil imagery is this idea of evil being covered as justice or virtue. And this is very much the case with Schedoni. So he to the outside is like a model priest. We are told that he had become one of the most exact observers of their outward forms once he joined the what do they call? Once he became a priest. Almost a prodigy for self-denial and severe discipline. He was pointed out by the fathers of the convent to the juniors as a great example, who was, however, rather to be looked up to with reverential admiration than with a hope of emulating his sublime virtues. But of course, he's evil. Like, he is terrible. And Vivaldi, at one point early on in the book, tries to call him out while he is doing some penance in the church. Vivaldi goes and says, "I know and will proclaim you to the world. I will strip you of the holy hypocrisy in which you shroud yourself, announce to all your society the despicable artifices you have employed and the misery you have occasioned. Your character shall be announced aloud." Takes a while, but it does happen. And we see this idea again when he and the Marchesa are plotting together. So the Marchesa is very upset because she believes Elena is of much lower status than them. She says, "The woman who obtrudes herself upon a family to dishonor it deserves a punishment nearly equal to that of a state criminal, since she injures those who best support the state. She ought to suffer." "Not nearly, but quite equal," interrupted the confessor. "She deserves death." In a later scene, when he's trying to convince her to go through with this, he says, "If this person was condemned by the law, you would pronounce her sentence to be just, yet you dare not. I am humbled while I repeat it. You dare not dispense justice yourself." Radcliffe continues, "A philosopher might perhaps have been surprised to hear two persons seriously defining the limits of virtue at the very moment in which they meditated the most atrocious crime. A man of the world would have considered it to be mere hypocrisy, a supposition which might have disclosed his general knowledge of manners, but would certainly have betrayed his ignorance of the human heart." The Marchesa was for some time silent and thoughtful, and then repeated deliberately, "I have not the shield of the law to protect me." "But you have the shield of the church," replied Schedoni. You should not only have protection, but absolution." "Absolution? Does virtue, justice, require absolution, Father?" "When I mentioned absolution for the action which you perceive to be so just and necessary," replied Schedoni, "I accommodated my speech to vulgar prejudice and to vulgar weakness." "Ah, forgive me, that since you, my daughter, descended from the loftiness of your spirit to regret the shield of law, I endeavored to console you by offering a shield of conscience. But enough of this. Let us return to argument. This girl is put out of the way of committing more mischief, of injuring the peace and dignity of a distinguished family. She is sent to an eternal sleep before her time. Where is the crime? Where is the evil of this? On the contrary, you perceive, and you have convinced me, that it is only strict justice, only self-defense." Twists and turns to try to make murdering somebody a virtuous, just act. And this is also compared to the Inquisition and how they act. Radcliffe is pretty critical of the Catholic Church in here, especially the Inquisition. And their hypocrisy is noted many times by Vivaldi. Because of course they're like torturing people into giving false confessions. Radcliffe writes, "While meditating upon these horrors, Vivaldi lost every selfish consideration in astonishment and indignation of the sufferings which the frenzied wickedness of man prepares for man, who, even at the moment of infliction, insults his victim with assertions of the justice and necessity of such procedure. Is this possible?" said Vivaldi internally. "Can this be in human nature? Can such horrible perversion of right be permitted? Can man, who calls himself endowed with reason and immeasurably superior to every other created being, argue himself into the commission of such horrible folly, such inveterate cruelty as exceeds all the acts of the most irrational and ferocious brute. Brutes do not deliberately slaughter their species. It remains for man, only man, proud of his prerogative of reason and boasting of his sense of justice, to unite the most terrible extremes of folly and wickedness. Later on actually says out loud to the people of the Inquisition, how is the tribunal at once the prosecutor, witness, and judge? What can private malice wish for more than such a court of justice at which to arraign its enemy? The stiletto of the assassin is not so sure or so fatal to innocence. I now perceive that it avails me nothing to be guiltless. A single enemy is sufficient to accomplish my destruction. So that people are so easily able to use the Inquisition to get revenge on people they don't like. Because all you have to do is accuse somebody, and then they're pretty much immediately assumed guilty, and they are imprisoned, they are tortured, eventually, frequently into giving a false confession. So, obviously, Radcliffe is condemning this. The idea of confession is also very important. I did not note any passages about it, but the book begins with this frame story of an English man visiting Italy. And they go into the Santa Maria del Pianto, a church, and are pointed out this confessional booth. And the friar who's there is like, oh, well, this has a very interesting story to go along with it. And then the narrative of all of this is that story. We don't return to the frame narrative at the end. It's also notable that Schedoni is the confessor to the Marchesa. He is supposed to be going there for her to make her confession. Obviously, she's not doing that. But she does actually, at the end, she repents and she confesses right before she dies. And there is a lot, like, the Inquisition is always saying, confess. Vivaldi's like, I have nothing to confess. But certainly Schedoni and several other people in this do, and they are all eventually brought to confess their misdeeds as part of this unconcealing. So the other theme that I just want to briefly mention is this idea of marriage for love rather than for status and wealth, which has been running through so many of these books. Now, Elena is perceived to be lower class than Vivaldi. That's why his parents are adverse to the match. His father actually wants him to marry for both status and wealth. We are told that overtures of an alliance had been lately made to the Marquis by the father of a lady who was held suitable in every consideration to become his daughter, and whose wealth rendered the union particularly desirable. So they want him to marry for wealth and class status. He wants to marry for love. This is ultimately gotten out of the way. It is found out that Elena is actually of noble descent. So everything's okay at the end. We can get married. But there is this idea of turning away from marrying for connection to marrying for love that is seen in Love and Excess. So many others. Tom Jones, Pamela, probably The Female Quixote, and even A Simple Story. So that's interesting to see how that all played out through this whole project. All right, so those are the major themes that I wanted to talk about. What were my thoughts on this as a book? I really enjoyed it. I liked it more than The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is the other book by Radcliffe that I have read. It's a lot shorter. It felt like there was less filler. And like there were some really, really intense scenes here. Like edge of your seat. Like just, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Or oh my God, this is really quite scary. Like the atmosphere was great. I think Radcliffe did a fantastic job with that. The character of Shidoni is particularly interesting. He is not like just a stock villain. He like does have interiority that we are allowed to see into. And even though he does horrible things, he's not fully evil. And I don't know really if Radcliffe was one of the first to do this or if that had been done before, but it was very interesting to be able to look into the villain's mind. So I liked that a lot. There were some slow parts, I'll be honest. Oh my god, there's this horrible tendency for Radcliffe to have a lower class like servant trying to explain or tell a story to someone of higher class. And the higher class person keeps interrupting them to be like, well, get to the point. And the person telling the story will be like, well, I was getting to the point if you would just let me tell the story. And it goes on for like pages. And this happens multiple times. It was driving me crazy. I was like, oh my god, Radcliffe, stop. Just tell the story. Please. I'm wondering if that was something like related to this idea of class, if like it was thought that like lower class Italian people, like, I don't know, talked too much? I don't know. I'm like, I don't know why that was there, but it was really irritating and hard to get through those parts. I'm like, pages, come on, just tell me the story. Because a lot of times it was like important backstory that you needed to know. It just took forever. I will say the best parts were with the Inquisition. Those scenes were so creepy and so tense and just like edge of your seat. That it was great. The beginning of the book is slow. Especially like with his beginning of Vivaldi's beginning to court Elena. It's just kind of like, get to the point. But the end is so fast-paced and exciting that completely made up for it. So I ultimately gave this 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it. Again, I highly recommend going in blind and not knowing much about it. So if you've watched this whole video, you shouldn't have done that if you haven't read it. But I will say, like, even though I read the introduction and I have heard people talk about this, I was not spoiled for some of these major twists, which was really nice because they were like, it was great. But yeah, 4 stars, I'd highly recommend. And if you're thinking of starting with Radcliffe, I would say this is actually a better place to go than Mysteries of Udolpho, just because of the length. Like, this is a tighter story. And honestly, I find the characters more interesting than in The Mysteries of Udolpho. So that is The Italian by Anne Radcliffe. For our next and final 18th century novel project read, we will be looking at Camilla by Frances Burney, also from 1797. So be on the lookout for that. Let me know down in the comments, have you read The Italian? What did you think of it? Have you read anything else by Anne Radcliffe? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.